When they told me that the Covington family had volunteered to be my foster family, I was pretty happy. That was until the guys began to tell me about them. It seemed that the family had been around almost as long as the town had. In fact, the original member of the family had been burned at the stake for witchcraft. There were many who still held that belief to heart. The funny thing was that I didn't really have a problem with them. They seemed perfectly normal to me, well, as normal as most families could be. The couple was a bit younger, maybe around 30 or so. Mr. Covington worked at some big law firm in New York and commuted there every day. Mrs. Covington, well, she was just beautiful. Speaking from a 16-year-old's raging hormones, she was spectacular. They only had one child, an infant girl named Cheyenne. She was as cute as a button. I could see that someday she would be as beautiful as her mother. Mrs. Covington was another matter altogether. I would find myself looking at Mrs. Covington and shaking my head. How could she have just had a baby, and not look like she had ever been pregnant in the first place? She must have a very high metabolism to be able to burn off the weight like she had. It didn't matter much, so I just let it pass and forgot about the whole thing. Soon, I settled in pretty well into the routine of the house. I had my chores and I did them. My biggest goal was to have this family adopt me, so, once I realized that they weren't the witches that everyone claimed them to be. After all, if you were a witch, would you live in a suburban home? Yeah, I saw Bewitched, but I'm talking about the real world. I was pretty happy with everything until that Saturday night. Mrs. Covington walked outside while I was cutting the lawn and asked me if I would be interested in watching Cheyenne for her. Apparently she and Mr. Covington were going out on the town. He had some type of business luncheon, then they were supposed to meet another couple at the theater. I stood there and wiped the sweat from my forehead. Sure. I can do that for you. I looked around the yard. I still have a bit to finish first though. How soon are you going to be leaving? We don't have to leave for another hour. That should give you enough time to finish this and take a shower. She looked around. How long do you think this will take you? She asked. Maybe another half hour. Will that be okay? I wiped the sweat from my face on the lower portion of my shirt. She nodded and quickly turned back into the house. I began pushing the mower again. As I pushed, I couldn't help but remember what she had been wearing. I pursed my lips into a silent whistle and slowly shook my head. Yep, Mr. Covington is one really lucky fellow. As soon as I had finished the lawn, I put away the mower and went in to clean up. I passed Mrs. Covington in the kitchen where she stopped me. I fixed some bottles for Cheyenne and put them in the refrigerator. She gave me a worried look. I just hope she doesn't give you any problems. She'll be fine, I said, pulling off my dirty shirt and tossing it over my shoulder. What problem could a tiny baby like that cause anyway? Well, for starters, I've never left her with anyone before. Then, on top of that, she's never had formula. I've always nursed her. She stood there holding the empty can of formula. She'll be fine, Mrs. Covington. You guys go on out and enjoy yourselves. I can manage. Besides, she'll probably sleep a bunch anyway. She smiled weakly at me, knowing just how demanding little ones can be. I laughed and continued on to the bathroom where I took a quick shower. Feeling refreshed, I walked back into the living room wearing only my denim shorts. Mr. Covington pointed to the phone. The number of the restaurant we're going to is on that paper by the phone. I included the theater as well. He waited as Mrs. Covington straightened his tie. Brad, I wrote my cell phone number down on that paper. If you have any problems with Cheyenne, don't hesitate to call. I nodded and began to head back to my room for a shirt. We should be back no later than 10 or 11 p.m., but if we are going to be late, I'll give you a call. She stopped as Mr. Covington reached for the door. Oh, John, I can hear her crying. She gave her husband a pained glance. She'll be fine, I'll take care of her right away, I said in an effort to calm her worries. There, see dear, Brad will take care of her. I smiled at his faith in me. About that moment, we all heard her begin to wail. I told them to go on and I headed straight for her room and readied her for a change. Cheyenne gave me a long look, then began to cry again in desperation. I quickly changed her diaper and lifted her up to my shoulder, her little face rubbing into my neck. I laughed as she started sucking on my skin as I carried her into the kitchen and pulled a bottle from the refrigerator. I began to warm up the water, all the while I sat in the kitchen and held Cheyenne on my lap facing me. I tried to play with her, but how much play can an infant really respond to? I ended up rubbing her nose against mine. I grinned as she noticed that I had nipples too. "You're not going to find anything for you there." I laughed. That didn't stop her from looking. She kept staring at my bare chest the whole time that her bottle was warming. After a while I took it from the pan and tested it on my arm. "That'll work." I headed into the living room where I could rock her as she ate. I sat her bottle down and turned her into position with her head lying on the crook of my left arm. Her little head was cradled inside my elbow. Just as I was about to pick up the bottle, the phone began ringing. I carried her over to the other side of the room with me and picked up the receiver. "Hello? Dude, Mark here, what you up to?" It was my buddy Mark from school. "Nothing much. I didn't want to let on that I was babysitting. Why don't you come on over?" I watched as little Cheyenne rolled her head toward my chest. "I got some new tunes for you to listen to." I realized that she was attempting to grab onto my nipple and held her away as we talked. "No. I better not, I have stuff to do." She started to scrunch her face into a cry, but I began to bounce my arm and she quieted down. "Bull dude, what could you possibly be doing that is more important than listening to new tunes with your bud?" I began to answer, but I became distracted when her soft lips touched the tip of my nipple again. I moved her away so I could answer Mark. "Well, okay then, I'll tell you. I'm watching the baby for them." I felt her little hands brush the skin at the sides of my nipple. Again I pulled her away. "Ha!" Mark laughed. "You playing mommy to their little kid?" I felt a bit embarrassed at his comment. I could feel Cheyenne getting angry with me, as her tiny hands fought to pull me closer. I tried to think of a way to answer Mark without sounding like some sissy. "Look man, I don't want to stay in foster care until I'm 18. I want to belong to a family." I must have relaxed a bit as I spoke and didn't realize just how close she had gotten as he responded to my last comment. "Yeah, well that won't get you adopted," he continued just as she opened her mouth and latched onto my nipple. I winced and tried to pull her away while not dropping the phone. Her tiny mouth began to move with emotion that I should never have experienced, while she attempted to nurse from my barren nipple. I was fighting two fronts at that time, one to remove her from me, and the other, not sound like I was up to anything, to Mark. "Hey Mark, I really gotta go." I danced under the pain that she was inflicting. "What you doing tomorrow?" he asked as the little one in my arms started to really bear down on my unprotected nipple. Nothing, I'm not doing a thing that I can think of." I was making painful faces as she was working my male nipple for all it was worth. "Want to hang out then? Maybe meet at the mall?" I tried again to pull her away by moving her head farther from my chest. That little effort only caused me to suppress a scream. "Whatever, look man, I've got to go." I looked back down at her as she had my entire nipple surrounded by her little mouth sucking for all she was worth. I had to get this idiot off the phone so I could rescue my sore nipple. "Well, if you don't want to meet at the mall, we could go on down to the park and shoot some hoops." Ow. "Listen Mark, I have to get off the phone. I'm expecting an important call." She was drawing on my sore teeth so hard that I could swear she would tear it off at any moment. "I'll talk to you later, okay, bye." I knew he hadn't hung up, as I heard him say something when the receiver fell. As soon as I had let the phone drop, I began to try and force her head away from my chest. I was afraid of hurting her, and yet I had to get her to stop. Her grip on my nipple was fierce. She had both of her little hands on my chest and was sucking for all she was worth. I finally got my finger along beside her mouth and broke her suction with a loud pop. She quickly dove back in and instantly latched on harder. I would bet that I was standing there for almost a minute, me prying, her sucking, before I was finally able to pull her away again using the same method as I tried before. I held her away from me as I examined the damage she had done. I now had a darkened bruise all around my reddened nipple almost 2 inches across. The poor nipple was red and looked as if it could bleed. It was standing erect almost a half-inch out from its bruised base. "Dang, that hurts," I said, casting a mean glance at the little child. Almost as if by cue, the phone began to ring again. I looked down at her and said, "Not this time, little one." I made a dash across to grab the bottle and firmly stuffed it into her mouth. "Hello?" She was making little sucking sounds at the bottle. "Hi, Brad. I forgot one thing. Could you please take the load out of the washer and throw them into the dryer?" I tried to hold her in my left arm, but the pain from her last treatment on my sore chest made me think otherwise. I quickly switched her to my right arm with her head cradled at my elbow. It was actually quite a feat, as I did all of this holding the phone with my shoulder to my ear. "Sure. I can do that," I answered as Cheyenne spit her bottle from her mouth. I watched in horror as it spun towards the floor and crashed into hundreds of little pieces and threw the warmed milk all over the room. "What was that sound?" asked Mrs. Covington, just as Cheyenne pulled my right nipple into her hungry little mouth. I again tried desperately to pull her away without making Mrs. Covington concerned on the other end. I just dropped a bottle of Cheyenne's onto the floor. The little girl was working her tiny tongue against my nipples so fast that I could swear she would rub it right off my chest. "I'm going to have to clean it up right now." Again I tried to remove her mouth, but her suction was too much without using both of my hands. "That's okay. I can wait," she replied. The little one still firmly attached to my chest, I ran into the kitchen for the mop. All the time Mrs. Covington was giving me pointers on how to remove the milk from the carpet over the cordless phone. After about 2 or 3 minutes of scrubbing, I finally stood up with the child, her mouth still holding its deadly grip on my sore nipple. I had finally put the mop away when Mrs. Covington decided that she had kept me from Cheyenne long enough. "Well, Brad, it looks like our meal is finally coming, so I'll let you go. I thought that I'd warn you that she'll probably be hungry in about 2 hours. That's how long it takes her between meals." I laid the phone back down just as she released her hold on me. I looked down at her as she dozed. "Too much work for you?" I asked, laying her back into her crib. "I'll try laying you back down, but I'll bet you wake up again." She cuddled into her bed and continued to sleep. I would have never believed that you would have stayed sleeping." While she slept, I looked after my sore chest. Now I had both sides to contend with. Each one was horribly swollen and bruised. I walked into the bathroom and began to look for any type of cream to medicate them from the pain I was having. I pushed everything aside in the medicine cabinet but found nothing. I knew I shouldn't, but I poked my head into their bedroom where I saw a tube of some type of cream laying on her side of the bed. I quickly walked around to that side and picked it up, reading aloud, "For the swollen nipples of breastfeeding mothers." I sat down on her side of the bed and put a generous amount on my finger. Well, I'm not a mother, but I do have swollen nipples, thanks to Cheyenne. It actually helped soothe the inflamed area, but it wouldn't rub in and dissolve. Instead, it just laid on the surface like 2 huge white circles over each nipple. I read the directions again. After application, cover with a nursing pad and allow the warmth of your skin to absorb the medicine. I began to look around. What the heck is a nursing pad? I found them soon enough. She must have had about 100 of them in a box. I laid them on my chest, but they kept falling to the floor. Now how the heck am I going to keep the stupid things up? Flipping the box over, I saw a diagram where the pad was placed into the cup area of a nursing bra. Shoot, I'm defiantly not going to wear that, I said, putting the box back down. I ran to my bedroom to grab a shirt. "I'll just cover them up with this," I said as I pulled it over my head. As soon as the material settled over my painful nipples, I winced. Ouch. I leaned forward to hold the shirt away. This defiantly isn't going to work either. Resigned to the fact that I may have to wear her nursing bra, I decided that I would just take it off as soon as I went to bed, or at least as soon as they pulled into the drive. I felt like a pervert, sneaking back into their bedroom. But, with a bit of luck, I saw some clothes inside a box with maternity clothes for Christine written on the side. I knew that Mrs. Covington was probably getting some clothes ready for her sister. I remembered that she had said something about Christine being pregnant earlier in the week. I smiled as I looked down at the box. Lying right on top was a bra folded up nicely. I picked it up and quickly walked into the bathroom. I wasn't sure if I really wanted to do this. I looked into the mirror at myself and then to my chest. My normally small nipples were now black and blue with bruises and slightly swollen. I still had the cream spread around the afflicted area. Sadly, I looked back at the bra in my hand. I raised it up by the straps. It seemed huge to me, but then, this was the first time I had ever really looked at one. I noticed that each cup had a little flap on it where I supposed the woman could open it and allow the child to nurse without actually taking off the bra. It was lacy and white with a silky shine to the material. There were little frills and patterns over the entire garment. I ran my hand across one of the cups. It seemed that they had extra padding to cushion the wearer's nipple. I hesitantly slipped my arm into one strap and then the other. I felt so stupid putting that thing on. After almost a minute of swinging my arm around the back, I finally grabbed each end of them and attempted to hook them together. I was actually surprised when I made it on only the third try. I hated to admit, but it actually fit me around the chest pretty well, other than the fact that I didn't really have anything to actually hold up. I pulled the little pads out of my pocket and slid them over my sore nipples. The coolness of the pad along with the medicine I had on felt pretty comfortable. I happened to look up after I had the last pad seated, and saw my reflection in the mirror. After all of the extra padding in the bra, and the additional pads I had placed to protect my chest, it gave me the appearance of having breasts. I felt my face warm. Crap, I have to cover this thing. I quickly slipped the shirt on that I had first tried to wear. While I didn't look like one of those women in the old 50s movies with the highway cones for boobs, I did feel pretty uncomfortable with the graceful swell that I now had under my shirt. Now, physically, I had to admit that the soft cushioning of both the extra padding in the cups of that contraption and the little round nursing pads made my aching nipples feel a whole world better. I walked into the living room and sat down to watch TV. I wasn't about to let Cheyenne's abuse of my chest stop me from enjoying myself. I felt so stupid sitting there with that bra on, even though it was protecting my chest from the abrasive material of my shirt. I started to flip the channels around. The first show I came to was of a young teen runaway who had gotten herself pregnant. Oh, great, as if I need to watch that. I quickly flipped the channel. I didn't need to be reminded that I was sitting there wearing a maternity bra. The next show was a movie called Baby's Day Out. I watched it for a little while, but switched it when I started to feel concern for a kid that I knew was probably richer than I was. After the channels raced past so fast it almost sent me into some kind of shock, I stopped it on Discovery Channel's show called Labor of Love. I almost gagged when I saw some lady giving birth. I shut the TV off and went into the kitchen for a soda. I took a sip of the cold drink and walked back into the living room. I leaned against the chair and rested. I knew that soon enough Cheyenne would be waking up and I was going to have to take care of her. Wondering how the medicine was working, I pulled out the shirt and looked under the lacy bra. Most of the white cream had been absorbed, but it was still very swollen and bruised. I frowned as I looked at the little baby's handiwork. Letting go of the cup, I gently rubbed the outside of my shirt. Damn, how does a woman put up with that kind of pain? I remembered looking at the clock and thinking that she would be waking up in about an hour or so. It only seemed to have been a minute or two that I had closed my eyes, but a soft cry from Cheyenne brought me to complete wakefulness. I staggered into the kitchen and pulled out her bottle, filled up the pan with water and turned the burner on low under it. Shuffling back into her bedroom, I picked up a diaper and laid both her and it on the changing table. Hey there, little one, you have a good nap? I rubbed my nose against hers, causing her to start smiling and kicking with glee. Quickly pulling open her little outfit, I wiped, powdered and changed her. I walked back into the kitchen with her staring wide-eyed at the bottle sitting in the pan. You ready to eat? I bet you are, pumpkin. I tested the bottle, but it still needed to heat a bit longer to warm. We sat down at the table where I bounced her gently on my knee. You like that? I said, laughing. She just giggled, more causing me to smile. I love hearing little kids giggle, they're so cute. I added as I lightly brushed my nose against hers. She held my face and kissed me with one of those wet open mouth, slobbery kisses. I laughed and wiped her slobber from my face. Yuck, that was gross. She started kicking her feet into my stomach as she laughed and threw her head back, almost scaring me to death with her sudden movement, but she never once paused in all of her giggles. I looked over to the pan and picked out the bottle. She watched me with wide eyes. "You ready for your milk?" I asked the little one. She looked at the bottle and it almost appeared as if she frowned, then back at my chest. "Oh, no you don't. I'm already smarting from the last time you tried that, you little poop." I chuckled. I reached across her to shut off the burner and retrieve her bottle. "I'll check this and have it ready for you in a jiffy." She must have had other ideas as she plowed her face into one of the padded cups and began to nuzzle around looking for an unprotected nipple. I laughed at her and shook the water from the outside of her bottle. "See, I told you that there wouldn't be anything there for you." I carried her back into the living room and sat down. I knew she was mad, because she kept spitting out the bottle. But I was a pretty persistent kid and kept pushing it back into her mouth. "I'm not giving up that easy, stinker." It took a while, but she finally finished it and I flipped her over my shoulder to burp her. I sat there listening to the pat sound of my measured thumping against her back. Suddenly I was rewarded with a loud burp that sounded more like a truck driver than a tiny little baby. "That's a good girl," I said softly as I kept up the patting as we gently rocked. She began to make long soft sounds that Mrs. Covington always said was singing. I knew that she would soon be asleep. It didn't take very long, and when I looked down at her sweet face, she was in a deep slumber. I gently raised myself and carried her back into her room. Laying her down, I stood there and watched her sleeping peacefully. I couldn't resist the moment and gently brushed my hand along her soft hair. "Sleep tight, kiddo." I kissed my finger and touched her cheek and quietly turning, left the room. I had never realized just how tiring a baby could make you be. I felt exhausted as I sat back down in the chair. Glancing up at the clock, I realized that it was only 9:15. Man, they won't be home for another hour. I started to close my eyes as the phone began to ring. I jumped up and grabbed it before it woke up Cheyenne. "Covington residence." "Hi Brad, how's it going?" Mrs. Covington said on the other end. "How's Cheyenne been treating you?" "She's just fine, I gave her a bottle and she's napping now." I suddenly remembered her asking me to throw the clothes over into the dryer. I headed into the laundry room while she continued. "I wanted to let you know that we decided to go out for cocktails after the theater, if it's okay with you." Her soft voice searching out answers with my success of babysitting. "Everything's fine here, go on and enjoy yourself, we'll be okay," I said, looking down at the gentle swell of my shirt. I didn't think I was ever going to tell anyone about this little adventure. "We should be there sometime around midnight, just give her the last bottle and I'll nurse her when I get home." I almost laughed when she said that she would nurse her. Lord knows she tried doing it to me. I started to throw the clothes over into the dryer. "Well, I have to be going. Thanks for everything, Brian. I'll probably talk to you in the morning. Bye now." I pressed the off button and laid the phone back on the dryer. Once I had finished transferring the clothes, I shut off the light and left the room in darkness with the phone. I was so dogged tired that I was afraid of falling asleep wearing her bra. I walked into the bathroom and pulled off the shirt I had been wearing. I slid my arms out of the straps and let the whole bra slide to my waist. I gently touched the area around the nipple. It was still tender and slightly swollen. My poor nipple was bright pink and standing straight up. I touched the side of it and winced from its pain. I wasn't sure what to do. I walked back into Mrs. Covington's room and picked up the little tube where I could gently apply some of the soothing cream into the irritated area again. I slid my arms back into the straps and pulled them back over my shoulder. Crap, I don't want to be caught wearing this thing. I picked my shirt off of the floor and slipped it back over my head. In the mirror, I frowned at my swollen chest. I look like some freaking girl. I carried the tube back into Mrs. Covington's room and laid it down. I got to keep from falling asleep wearing this thing. That's all I would need to have them find me like this. I headed back into the living room and sat down. I knew the sleep was fighting its way into my exhausted body. Maybe if I just closed my eyes for a moment. Her gentle cries again brought me to attention. Damn, doesn't she ever sleep? I looked up to the clock on the wall, 11:15. I've been sleeping for almost 2 hours. I jumped to my feet and repeated my earlier process, filling the pan with water, placing the last bottle into the pan and heading to Cheyenne's room to get her ready. Hi there, honey. Did you have a good nap? I lifted her out and kissed her soft cheek. Let's get you all cleaned up and then you can eat. I laughed as she looked directly toward my aching chest. Laughing, I don't think so, little one. I'm pretty sure you've inflicted enough damage on them already. I stepped back and realized that I had wiped, powdered and changed her, all without really thinking about it. Dang, I'm good. I laughed as I gathered her up and headed into the kitchen. After another quick check, I realized that I had forgotten to turn the burner on. Okay, well, we'll just have to play a game. I took her little feet and began to play patty cake with them. Each time I got to the part where we would roll them, I began to gently pat her face with her tiny feet, causing her to giggle. We kept this up for almost 5 minutes, causing the both of to go into fits of laughter. I lifted her high above my head and began to playfully nibble at her tummy. Again she laughed, causing me to smile with pride. Well, at least you're a fun little one to play with. She giggled and began to kick her little feet. I held her against my chest as I reached over to check the bottle. While I was doing that, she started to root for that elusive nipple of mine. I laughed as her nuzzling made a tickle. Now you just hang on there, little one. I have to give this another minute or so. She kept rubbing her little head across both of my nipples hidden well under all the padding, surprising me at the lack of pain at that moment. Maybe they're starting to heal. I wondered aloud. You're such a silly girl. I laughed as I lifted her face from my rounded bosom. You're not going to find anything for you there. I again rechecked the bottle. Finally the fluid inside was warm enough. We walked back into the living room and sat down. There I settled back and gave her the bottle. The whole time she drank, I couldn't take my eyes off of her. She was just so precious. I kept kissing her little head and rocking back and forth while we sat there. It seemed that the more I sat there, I would speak softly to her, saying little things like, "That's a good girl," and "What a sweetheart." Finally, as she neared the bottom of the bottle, she relaxed and let the nipple fall from her mouth. Looks like my little pumpkin is finished, I whispered. I gently lifted her to my shoulder and patted her back. After about 20 pats, I heard a gurgling burp. Oh, that didn't sound good, I said, looking over my shoulder at the mess that was beginning to run down the back of my shirt. I did all I could do to keep from gagging right then and there. Great, thanks, little stinkpot. I wiped her face with my shirt and took her back into her room. The entire time she never woke up. I slunk out of the room and looked at the clock. They'll be home in about a half hour. Gives me enough time to take a shower and wash the smell from my body. I tossed my shirt into the washer as I passed the laundry room. The bra was still relatively clean and I slipped back into their darkened bedroom and put it into the box neatly folded like when I found it. I took the pads and tossed them into her waistband where all of the others she wore were. Quickly back into the bathroom I ran and jumped into the shower. There the warm water tenderly massaged my chest. I looked down as the water dripped from the enlarged nipples. Dang, she got me real good. I shook my head as I examined the swollen mounds on my chest. Hope this swelling goes down by morning. I gently washed the area around my nipple where it was darkened and rounded from the bruising. I guess I won't be swimming for a while. I sighed at my swollen and defined chest. I quickly finished with my shower and grabbed a towel to dry myself off. I turned out the light and headed into my room. I wasn't sure if I could sleep with these painful protuberances on my chest. I lay down on the bed and pulled my covers up to my neck. This isn't going to work. The covers kept riding against my nipples as I took breaths. I pushed the covers down to my stomach. Finally, when I could bear it no more, I got up and flipped the light on. I gently rubbed my swollen chest. Wow, she got me good, even my dang veins are showing. I opened up my dresser and pulled out a soft shirt. Maybe this will help. I quickly put it on and buttoned it up. It did feel better, but I remembered why I didn't usually wear this shirt. As soon as I tried to roll over, the buttons started to come undone. Grumbling to myself, I lay on my back and reattached them. I wanted to be asleep by the time the Covingtons got home, so I shut off the light and drifted off to sleep in the big queen-size bed. Sometime during the next hour, the couple arrived at home. they were both tipsy and groping each other as they headed directly into the bedroom. As Mrs. Covington passed Cheyenne's room, she made a face that caused her husband to wonder what was wrong. "Smells like someone threw up." She stepped into her daughter's bedroom and saw the little one laying in vomit. "Oh, gross," the young mother said as she lifted her soiled daughter from the crib. "Here, honey, you clean up her crib and I'll get her taken care of." As with most any parents, they worked as a team. Each one took to their task until it was done. Finally, Mr. Covington walked back into the living room where his wife was nursing Cheyenne. "Was it something the boy did?" he asked. "I don't think so. She must just have the formula. It probably gave her a tummy ache." She kissed the small round head as her daughter nursed. "Well, we do have one problem. Her mattress is soaked." He knelt beside his little daughter and kissed her cheek. "How soaked?" Mrs. Covington asked her husband. "She got it good enough that I had to scrub down both sides. I left it in the shower to drip dry." "Well, we can lay her with us then." She shrugged her shoulders. "What about?" His hands lightly began to glide up her smooth thigh. "Oh, aren't you the horny one?" she said, giggling. "Only for you," he said, firmly handling her aroused crotch. Mrs. Covington let out a very long breath. "My gosh, Roger, you know what effect that has on me." "Yeah, I know." He bounced his eyebrows at his lovely wife. "I'll let you figure out where to put the baby. I'll be waiting. I'm sure you'll know where to find me." He let his hand free and slid it all the way across her body, causing her to shiver. After he left the room, she looked down to her daughter. "I hope you won't mind too much. We're going to cut this little late-night snack back a bit." She looked over her shoulder toward the bedroom where her husband was undressing. "Mommy has to, talk to Daddy for a while." She removed the suction of her daughter's mouth with a pop and burped her while she headed back toward the infant's room. "Oh, shoot, where am I going to put you?" She frowned when she saw the empty crib. "I know. I don't think Brian will mind." She headed into the guest room where I was soundly sleeping. "I'll just get you when you wake up. By that time we should be done and you'll probably be hungry again," she said as she laid the tired little baby in the bed next to me. In only moments the little infant was sound asleep. In my dreams I kept replaying the scene over and over where the little baby had been sucking my nipple. At first I was reminded of just how painful it had been, but then it became more pleasurable. I was strangely sitting there in the rocking chair and allowing the little child willing access to my full and engorged breast, and doing nothing about it. I could hear her gently swallowing the contents she was drawing from my breast. I slowly came out of my slumber and realized that the window was open. It was raining and the rain outside had found its way into my dream as the sound of her gentle swallow. I threw the covers back and pulled shut the open window. I staggered back to bed and realized that my shirt had come undone, but I couldn't get my tired hands to clutch the buttons. I just waved it off and crawled back into the bed, drawing the covers back up to my chin. Feeling a bit of discomfort from my left chest, I gently stroked the skin and rolled over. I remembered thinking it strange that the other one wouldn't feel the same. Slowly sleep pulled me in and I drifted somewhere between being awake and asleep. Soon though, the gentle summer rain and slow rolling thunder helped me return back into a deep and relaxing sleep. Again the erotic dreams began. I knew the girl from my school. I had seen her several times at the pool when I was with Mark. She was very good looking and I was surprised to find only she and I at the pool on a bright sunny day. In my dream, she and I were lying together on one long chair and she started to kiss my chest. Slowly she worked her mouth toward my nipple. Teasing it into a hardened little tower, she began to lick and kiss the tip. I moaned with the pleasure she was giving me, as she drew it into her waiting mouth. Her long brown hair was splayed across my chest as she continued to suck erotically at my nipple. To my surprise, her head began to change and grow smaller, her hair drawing back into her scalp and getting fine and blonde. She had transformed from the girl at the pool into Cheyenne. The infant drank from my round teat full with milk. I heard myself say, "Drink up, honey, mommy's got plenty." I heard a sound of someone enter the room as I slept. It almost sounded like Mrs. Covington, but I was too sleepy to open my eyes. It didn't last long and I just ended up pushing it out of my mind. I slept on throughout the night. Sometime in the morning I laid on my side and looked up to my alarm clock. It was 5:30 in the morning and I was wide awake. I looked out of the window and could see that the rain from last night had stopped and the sun was shining brightly. I sat up and scratched my head, stretched and yawned. Swinging my feet to the floor, I stood up and stretched again, then stumbled off toward the bathroom. I figured that I might as well get up and get some stuff done that I had been putting off. I rinsed off my toothbrush and squirted some toothpaste on it. Filling up the cup with water, I began to scrub my teeth and rinse them. Finally satisfied with the feeling of my mouth, I bent down to spit the water into the sink. That's when I got one of the biggest surprises of my life. My shirt had opened and I gasped at the sudden chill of my skin coming into direct contact with the icy coldness of the porcelain sink. I looked down and felt my knees almost weaken. I not only had swollen nipples almost 3/4 of an inch long, but the entire chest area around the nipple was large and round. Even the tender skin where Cheyenne had bruised me had suddenly and most strangely gave me the appearance of a woman's breast. I slowly opened the shirt. Oh my God! I stared with disbelief at the sight that met my eyes. Both nipples and chests had swollen during the night into almost breast-like proportions. I slowly turned sideways and looked at the profile I presented. If I were a betting kid, I would have sworn that each of those things rose outward from my chest by almost 3 inches, but the worst of the matter was that the nipples were about as round as my little finger and a 1/2 inch long. I realized that I wasn't going anywhere today, at least until the swelling goes away. I look like I have breasts, just like a woman. I quickly closed my shirt, but how? Then I remembered the events of yesterday. I dropped my toothbrush onto the floor as the door swung open. Mrs. Covington stood there in her robe. Brian. Oh my God! What happened? How can I answer that question if I'm not sure myself? I looked back into the mirror. You look like you have breasts. How? Where did they come from? She pulled my shirt aside and looked at them. I have my suspicions, I said as I pointed for her to let me out. We walked back into the living room where I explained what had happened during the evening. As we spoke, Mr. Covington walked into the living room carrying Cheyenne, and stopped as soon as he saw my pendulous breasts. What the heck happened to you? He looked at me and then his wife. I'll explain it to you while we get dressed. Come on. She stood up and handed me the baby, then ushered her husband toward the bedroom. I sat down with the little girl and frowned. You did this to me. I didn't want to be anywhere near that tiny infant. I picked her up and headed into the kitchen to warm up another bottle. As I opened up the refrigerator, I realized that I had used the last one. I switched arms that were holding Cheyenne, moving her into my right arm as I pushed the door closed. I felt a slight tug at my chest, and when I looked down I watched her tiny mouth engulf my nipple and she began to suck. Even though I attempted to get her to release it, she wouldn't. I winced at the pain I knew would be coming, but it never came. Instead, I felt only the rhythmic movement of her tiny tongue against my nipple. The worst part was it actually helped me relax. I leaned forward and gently kissed her head. Softly I whispered to her, "Just are you doing to Mom, me Cheyenne?" I walked back over to the table and pulled out a chair as I watched her little jaw and cheeks move with the motion of her tiny tongue. I stared with awe as her little throat moved as if she were actually swallowing. I heard a gasp and looked up. Both of the Covingtons were standing at the doorway. How? Stammered Mrs. Covington. I looked at them with tears rolling down my cheeks. I don't know how this has happened. I can't explain. I was too much in shock to object to her aggressive sucking. My God, but you're a guy. How? Mr. Covington watched in disbelief, then an almost wave of knowledge washed over him. Oh, Christ. I think I know. What? Mrs. Covington knelt on the floor next to me and watched her daughter nurse from my swollen breast. Do you know what could have caused this? She said to her husband, pointing at my chest. He tilted his head a bit and then shrugged his shoulders. I think that Cheyenne may have done this when she suckled from him yesterday. Remember, witches are a part of my family heritage, just like the Scottish are yours. He looked down as his daughter released her grasp. She may have a bit of the witchly powers in her, he said to his wife. She must have cast some sort of spell on him. Apparently she doesn't like bottled formulas so much that she made her own. It just happened that it was Brian that was the recipient of her magic. Well, how do we make her stop? She said to her husband. I'm not sure we can. I'm not sure anybody can. He looked at me, then his daughter. We may have to wait until she is old enough to want to change him back to normal. How far do you suppose her immature magic will change him? She asked as if I wasn't there. He answered with a shrug. I lifted her up and began to pat her back. Surely she can't be getting any sustenance. He replied, he's a guy. He wouldn't have any milk in those, would he? Mrs. Covington looked back at me as Cheyenne let out a loud burp. Apparently she may be. Look at the other nipple. She pointed at my chest and I looked down. There, dancing at the very tip, was a single drop of a milky white fluid. That would explain why she didn't want to nurse after we, well, you know. She looked from her husband to me. Oh, crap! I gasped. She took the infant from me and swung her around. See if she'll drink from the other side? It didn't take much effort as she pulled my swollen teat into her mouth and began to suckle. I couldn't help but continue to watch the tiny infant as she nursed from me. Even before I realized what I was saying, I spoke. Isn't she just so precious? Then as I said it, I began to tremble. What will happen to me next? Just how far will her spell go? I asked. They both shrugged their shoulders. It may only go as far as it has. She may be taking you all the way. Mr. Covington sighed. I slowly looked down as a long single hair of Mrs. Covington's fell across Cheyenne's face. I gently picked it off of the baby's cheek and went to toss it to the floor. Only, it fell as far as my arm. As it fell, it tickled me. I picked it up again and held it out. A sharp stab of pain was felt high upon my head. This long blonde hair wasn't Mrs. Covington's at all, it was mine. Oh, crap! I sighed.